welcome to WUP with Jen. I hope all you warrior unicorn parents are rocking it. I think it's fair to say from previous episodes that I had a tough time with getting my daughter diagnosed and proper medical and intervention support early on in her life. I felt really let down and defeated. And while a lot of my story is about the struggles and fear and losing faith in the medical profession, in more recent years, I found that once I met others who were also awesome parents of special needs kids, that there was true inspiration to be found. And I have made some amazing friends along the way, and one of them is here today. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Ron. Let's tell people how we met.
So we met, I think it was my son's 14th birthday party. I sent an invitation to all of his classmates, and you had responded, "Sorry, we can't come."
I know, isn't that a terrible start?
Yeah, sorry, I can't make it to the birthday party, but I think you guys were going somewhere else for spring break, so...
I had a legitimate excuse.
Yeah. You got off the hook on that one. At least you came this last weekend to his birthday party, so that was fun, and I'm glad Elle had fun. But so in the signature, it was your real estate number and logo, and I was just happened to be looking for a house, so I said, well, when you get back from spring break, can you help me find a house? And story goes from there.
Yeah, I mean, this was when the kids were in 7th grade, so that was 2 years ago. And they weren't even actually in the same class. You were just the nice dad that invited everybody into the 7th grade, I think. Remember?
Yeah, because there were 2 classes next door. Yep, and Elle was in. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So we began your house hunting dream, and I felt really honored to be helping you find a home for you and Darius, because you were not living in a very desirable area.
Yeah, that's correct. So that's right when Darius's mom and I split up, and so we just kind of found a cheap place to get us by, and wasn't the best of places. So we were in need of a good home.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't easy. I think we wrote up 4 contracts, and 3 of them got canceled because the agents didn't list the properties properly. But the home you did end up securing, I learned something about you that I didn't know. I mean, obviously I knew you had a special needs son, but you wrote a letter to the seller because you were up against a cash investor that was offering more than her asking price. And she really wanted to hand off her home to someone else, someone who's going to really enjoy it and love it as much as she had. And so you wrote a letter and included a picture of you and Darius, and it was in that letter, and this is the spoiler alert, and this is why Ron is awesome. You wrote in the letter that he wasn't your biological son, and that his mother had been your girlfriend, and she left you guys. And it was such a well thought out and compelling letter, and obviously won over the heart of the seller because you got the house.
Got the house.
But that's why I thought it'd be so great to, share your story and hopefully inspire others that, to face the tough times and take over.
Well,
you're welcome to talk about your background and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, yeah, there's lots of folks out there that need inspiration. So, if we can offer any at all, I'm honored to do that. So it's that story, that letter that I wrote, is a story I've had to tell just kind of out of necessity. When you're taking a child to medical appointments or dealing with the school, and they notice right away you have a different last name, and they're like, well, where's his mom? How are you related? We're not related. Well, what are you doing with this child? Right. How did this happen? So that's a story that I've had to tell a lot, and it kind of has a long background that started with how his mom and I met. We grew up together, very young. I think we met. I was 12 years old, and she was 9, and we kind of had that little boyfriend-girlfriend thing back then that, whatever it is at that age, middle school. And
You were
really,
9.
yeah. Well, she was 9, I was 12.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was a little bit older, and her cousin was my best friend growing up. So we went to school together, we went to parties together, we spent summers together. So his mom and I are really close from a very, very young age. But she ended up, her family moved away. We were living in rural Kansas, and her family moved away. So I didn't see her for years, 15 years probably. And then Facebook suggested friends pops up, his mom, and so we started talking, and it just so happened at that time she was living in Washington, and she was going through a divorce, and I was living here in Phoenix and going through a divorce, and we were both moving back to Wichita, Kansas, at the same time. So we got there and decided, we would start dating after all those years, and she had this little 7-year-old boy, and he and I just clicked, and we just became buddies, and have been ever since. So that's kind of how it started. So I am kind of like family in a way. I've known him my whole life, all of his aunts and uncles and all of those people I'm close to. So
Who's his biological father? Was that from her marriage?
no, his biological father went to prison when he was 6 months old. So he's never known him, never seen him, never met him, and remains in prison to this day. So that was a huge struggle when I went to legally adopt Darius, because I just had temporary guardianship for a while. When I went to legally adopt him, I had to deal with someone that was in prison and deal with the prison system in order to get the rights severed or released so I could become his adoptive father.
Oh, I can't even imagine how hard that must be.
Yeah, well, it was hard on his mom because she's 21 years old, and she has this baby in a basket and nobody, no support, no help. So she went through a lot of the tough years by herself. So I think she was relieved when, we got together and I was willing to help with Darius and kind of take on a parental role. And, it started with small things. I had a job that allowed me to leave work if I needed to go pick him up from school or take him to a doctor's appointment. I've worked for Cox Communications all this time, and they've been very supportive and flexible. So they've always let me do what I needed to do to take care of Darius, even before, he was adopted. And she always had jobs where she just couldn't leave, you get in trouble for leaving work. Most people do, So I started taking on.
Yeah, I call that working mom guilt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I don't know how she did it all those years by herself, but she did, and she raised an amazing kid. He makes friends everywhere he goes.
He's an awesome kid.
Thank you.
So you came into his life when he was 7. Did he have a diagnosis at that time? Had she been seeking out any types of services or therapies?
He had a Fragile X syndrome diagnosis at about 1.5 years. So that was his diagnosis, and she was just getting the limited services that were provided by the state where she lived in Washington, and they moved around a lot. They were in Washington, Nebraska, Chicago, and then kind of landed in Kansas. But all of those states don't offer much in support, even with an autism diagnosis like Arizona does. So
when did he get diagnosed on the spectrum? How old was he?
That was when we moved here to Phoenix. So that was, he was, let's see, he was like 12 years old at that time.
Okay, that's
so,
kind of like when
yeah,
they get diagnosed late, and then you miss out all those early years for them to get what might have put them on a different path, or they might have overcome some of the obstacles at a much younger age than what you and I are dealing with right now as
Right.
teenagers.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I found out was that, even though he had this diagnosis for Fragile X syndrome, it didn't qualify him for the benefits. It had to be the autism diagnosis. So even though they're very similar, the same thing, so pretty much had to go to a doctor and say, hey, we need an autism
Right.
diagnosis
Right.
for him because, it's pretty much the same thing. So
It's amazing how the interventions that are successful with autism are actually successful pretty much across all disabilities.
right, yeah, and they are. It's powerful, and then it's challenging that you have to jump through those hoops to get things done. So that's been one of the biggest challenges for me.
And something about him asking you to be the person that would tuck him in at night.
Oh, yeah, that's really when my heart got stolen and I realized, I was in deep trouble. So he, his mom, we were dating for about 6 months, and he would always ask his mom to tuck him in. And really, he didn't talk much at that time. He had, he was like a little feral child. He had long hair and long fingernails, wouldn't let anyone cut his nails or his hair, and barely talked. I mean, it was one word usually, or a grunt and pointing. But this one night, just out of the blue, he came up to me and he said, "Ron, tuck in," which wasn't a full sentence, but it was the closest thing to a sentence.
Communication.
Yeah, closest thing to communication that he'd ever done. So ever since then, including up until last night, I've tucked him in every night. So he's like, Buddy Hobbs from Elf. He won't go to bed until I tuck him in. So that's when, that's like I said, that's when my heart was stolen, and that's when I kind of decided, I need to take care of this kid. He's asking me to, so, and I can't say no.
So how long were you dating?
So we dated up until about 4 years ago. So we moved to Phoenix together, and lived together all those years. And then when we decided to split up, that we weren't going to be together anymore, I kind of said, well, Darius is going to have to stay with me. And she left the state. And before she did, though, I said, you have to sign, temporary guardianship at least till you figure out what you're going to do. But, that some people would criticize her for that, and that's understandable. But on the other hand, she kind of knew that I was the more stable person, or he was better off with me because I provided a more stable environment and insurance and all the things that he needed, or someone on the spectrum needs. So it had to be hard for her, but it was the right choice, and she knew it. So then it was just him and I for a while, and then she did come back, and she is in his life now and sees him every weekend or every other weekend for 1 or 2 nights. So she's come back around and has offered some support, but it's mostly just been Darius and myself.
I mean, I think that most parents out there never anticipate what it's like to have a kid with disabilities. And I just think it's really profound and incredible that you decided that you were going to go ahead and take responsibility for him. And it wasn't your responsibility in the first place. And I don't know a lot of people that go out there and just choose, to take on that burden, especially being single and, working. And your story just meant so much to me that you would do that. And he's such a happy, great kid. And I enjoy his company quite a bit. What was it like trying to go through the adoption process? I mean, I know you mentioned it was difficult with the biological father having to give up rights to a child he's probably never met. And then, the mom, how was that? How was it going about that? Like, was it okay because she had not fought it and she knew it was what was best?
Yeah, she was in complete agreement with the adoption and very supportive of it. So that portion, was not that difficult. It was out of the ordinary or non-traditional. So finding an adoption agency and an adoption attorney that understood the situation, because typically it's grandparents that are adopting, or a family member, an aunt or an uncle. So again, having someone adopt a child that has no, blood relation or marriage relation, Some attorneys that I called just couldn't even grasp it. And so I had to look for a different attorney until I found someone that said, oh, yeah, we've done this before. It's very rare. So just finding someone to help was a challenge in its own right. But then the process was very, I mean, they really put a microscope on you. So my whole history from all the way back into childhood was brought up. All of my family members that live in another state, some of them I don't even talk to, received letters that they had to fill out, information about me. But the most challenging part was, it took a long time. It was a long process and cost a lot of money. But again, shout out to Cox. Cox reimbursed me for all the adoption fees and all.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So they paid for his
Wow.
adoption. Yeah, but his father, his biological father, was in prison. So the attorney sent, just a standard letter saying, this child is going to be adopted. Will you relinquish voluntarily your parental rights? And I guess, I didn't know this, but apparently if you're in prison, you can decide to not get any mail at all. So any mail that comes to you just gets sent back. So they kept getting sent back, and the attorneys, they didn't know why, and eventually they called, and trying to call and communicate with the people in the prison system is all on its own a
That's
difficult.
entirely another pod.
Yeah, exactly. So they finally found out, oh, he's not even getting these. So we thought he was sending them back because he
was
didn't
saying
want to
no.
comply. Yeah. But he just wasn't even seeing them. So we ended up having to hire the local, it's a federal prison. So we had to hire the local sheriff to serve him with the papers, because you can't reject it, when the sheriff's bringing it. It's not mail technically. So we had to pay for 3 attempts. We paid for the sheriff's gas. It was, fuel for his car and everything. But it ended up, as soon as he found out what it was, he complied.
Okay.
And he was okay with it.
Just getting in the letter was the struggle.
Just getting it to him, was the struggle. So, but it was over a year process for just to get certified to adopt, and then to get a court date. That was the longest thing. Once I got the certification, it was 6 months, because there was a court date. A lot of people try to do it on their own, and they screw up the paperwork, and they show up in court and they don't have the right paperwork, and the judge sends them back, and they have to get another court date. So the system's just backlogged with those type of people that try to do it on their own and don't have an attorney. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of people try to do realistic transactions on their own too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would hire an attorney for an adoption.
Yeah. And luckily, again, it was something that I was reimbursed for, so that's another kind of blessing for me. That
I think you mentioned at one point, though, that there is the potential that she could decide she wants custody back or something, or are you just completely now have 100% custody?
Now I have 100% custody. So the adoption did not establish custody at all. So the adoption.
What does it do?
The adoption just says that I'm legally his parent, so that
Okay.
I'm responsible for him, for his care. So it doesn't say anything. So at that point, after the adoption, she could have picked him up and left state and filed for child support, and I could have never seen him again. So there was a gap until just recently. This is less than 6 months ago, we finally got the custody thing, and it's a whole nother legal process, and it's a whole nother process of finding a different attorney that understands the situation, because a lot of the attorneys I called, and these were referrals from professional referrals that I got, and I called the attorneys, and they're like, well, when the adoption gives you custody, and I said, no, it doesn't. It just makes me responsible. Just like you get a divorce, even though we were never married, when you get a divorce, you have to go do a custody hearing.
Right.
But just because we were never married didn't mean we still didn't have to do the custody thing. So I filed for custody, and she said, so I have all legal rights, legal decision-making rights, which in Arizona that means full custody. And she has visitation, and she signed off on that. Her caveat was that as long as I didn't ask her for child support, she would
Okay.
sign off on that. And I said, that's fine with me.
I just think that it's so difficult when you're navigating the process. It's hard, and then when you're figuring it out for the first time, I mean, that's why I wanted to do this pod, because of meeting people like you who, I mean, that's why we're warriors, because you figure it out and you just keep persistence in place to get the answer that you ultimately want to hear. And I just imagine that there's so many people out there that give up, and because it's hard. In the meantime, you're doing all of this, and there's my dog groaning. Yeah, this is real. We're recording out of my dining room. But I'm just so impressed, and I hope that maybe there's someone out there who will need this as a nudge, or encouragement to, go through that process.
Yeah, I hope so too. And it's just the persistence, and it's finding the right people, because when I called for the custody situation to file a petition for custody, I called several attorneys that just had no clue. And that gets very frustrating because, especially if you're working and you're a single parent and you have to take time out of your day during business hours to make these calls, and these attorneys that are family attorneys that should know this stuff, they don't know. Yeah, so it took several phone calls, and even paralegals that would answer the phone wouldn't let me talk to the attorneys.
Not without charging you, right?
Well, no, they were more like gatekeepers. They're like, well, what you're asking for, we can't do, or it doesn't exist. So they didn't understand. So finally, I just kept calling, and finally this attorney, I talked to her, and she said, oh, it just clicked. She said, yeah, I know exactly what to do. And so, yeah, it just takes that, like you said, persistence, and you got to find the right people for the right situation.
I feel like you're the male version of me.
Maybe.
That's supposed to be a compliment, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you.
I noticed that Darius calls you Ron. He doesn't call you Dad. And of course, I consider you as Dad because,
Yeah, well, he does when he wants something. So when he's when he's trying to butter me up, he calls me Dad. And if you say who's your dad, he will say Ron. So that's one of the things that happened. Kind of a funny story at the adoption hearing, because typically the child at his age has to consent and say, yes, I want this person to be my father. And we had his child psychologist write up a letter for the judge, explaining his condition and that might not be necessary. So rather than ask the typical question, which I don't remember, well, I think the typical question is, do you, want Ron West to be your father? And most, typical kids would say yes or no. Well, Darius already considered me his dad, so that question was confusing to him, So instead of asking that way, the judge said, who is your dad? And he pointed to me, and of course it's got to be on the record. So the pointing didn't work, so we had to rephrase it as, what is your dad's name?
We're having all sorts of noise in here. My text just went off and I had it turned off, and then my dog just went out through the dog door.
Dog out the dog door.
Doorbell's going to ring any minute.
Yeah, who knows who it'll be.
All right, I want to get you off track, but so he was pointing to you.
Yeah, so he was pointing to me, and they needed a verbal response. So, I whispered to the attorney, you have to ask him, who is your dad? And so the judge asked him that, and he said, Ron. And he calls everyone by the name he's introduced by. So another funny story is that I'm a junior, so my dad's name is also Ron. So when Darius was real little, 8 years old or so, and I introduced him to my father, I said, his name is Ron too. And I guess grammatically I should have said his name is also Ron. So Darius calls his grandpa, my dad, Ron too, and that's what he's called him forever.
They're so literal.
Yeah.
In everything.
Mm-hmm. Yep, everything. And, he calls his grandmother, my mom, by the first and last name, and he even calls his mom by her first name too. So whatever he's introduced at, and whatever other people call you, that's what he wants to call you as well. So
yeah, he calls me Jen.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
We spent a lot of time together. looking
Yeah.
at houses.
Yeah, and it's funny because another thing is we go to Sport Clips to get our hair cut once a month, and the woman that does does his hair. Her name is Jen also.
Oh,
And
how does he differentiate?
well, he was. We would show up, and he'd be like, "You're not Jen," and, because he was thinking of you. And so every time we would go, he would tell her, "You're not Jen." And we'd have to explain because it was a month apart, every
Right.
time we saw him, he was like, "Yeah, she's Jen, just
could-
like the
you
other
can have
Jen."
more than one name.
Yeah, there's more than one Jen.
More than one person. That's hysterical. You should just call her not Jen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
Might not give you a very good haircut.
Yeah, well, he ended up requesting to go to a different woman to do his hair because, he's like, "You're not Jen, so I want
the
this
heck
other
out."
chick." Yeah.
I just love hearing things about that because as difficult and as challenging it is, to be in this position, these kids are really awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
they're being so literal and just being completely transparent and honest. I mean, they just don't have that filter.
Right, yeah.
And you just don't know how other people are going to react. Like either people are cool or they're like, that kid doesn't like me. They want, because of my name.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to think about it in all aspects of life. Like we'll be at the grocery store and I'll tell him, "Hey, run and get a bottle of water." So he literally runs, and knowing that, so it's, I tell him you're not supposed to run in the grocery store, but then I tell him, "Hey, run and get a
Yeah.
bottle of water." So you have to be real careful with your language.
You have to think before you speak sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Well, we had a really fun time with you and Darius out on our boat at Lake Pleasant last summer. My daughter just loves the water. I think a lot of kids with disabilities love water. It reminds them, I think, of being in utero. But we go out on the boat, and my teenage son likes to commander the boat. And Darius was quite concerned about the speed that we were going at. And I just think of, he just perseverated on the speed, and he kept, asking Jack to slow down. And
Right.
and you're just kicking back like, this is life. And, you didn't really mention anything, but my son kept looking back and he'd say, "Yes, Darius. Are you going fast?" "Yes, Darius." "Are you going fast?"
Yeah.
"Yes, Darius." And I mean, I'm so proud of my son because he's so kind and accepting of others. Obviously he's grown up with his sister, and we have lots of friends and family with people, kids with disabilities. And I don't know, I just felt like it was kind of like a happy day for me because I was able to see Darius, my son, my daughter in their ultimate element with no judgment. And I wish we could always be in that environment, like all the time. Because sometimes I'm embarrassed, like Elle embarrasses me when we're out in public because of, her behavior, and people will just, look at me like I'm a bad parent. And so it's just fun to get together and do things where you don't have to really worry about what anyone else thinks.
Yeah, it is. And we had a great time. Darius was super nervous, which I didn't understand. He's been on boats before and gone fast, but years, the older he gets, the more nervous he is about stuff. But yeah, it was great. Thank you so much for inviting us. It was a good experience for him, even though it wasn't the most fun for him. It gave him some exposure, and he got to be a part of that, and it was great. And you're right. I kind of have learned to block it out, and actually coming from the Midwest, you talk about being out and people possibly being judgmental and being conscious of that. In the Phoenix metropolitan area, people are much more accepting and non-judgmental than they are in the Midwest. It's like night and day. So it's another reason I'm very happy that we moved here, because I've heard several times people say that Phoenix is the most autism-friendly city in the world. Have you heard that?
I haven't, but who would believe it? We don't fund education properly, but
Wow.
we support autism.
Yeah, well, nobody funds education properly, at least in the U.S. But as far as the services and all the different, like SARC, we've got a lot of stuff that other states don't. So
Yeah, I know. I'm grateful all the time. We've looked at relocating to different states, and my first criteria is to see what services are offered, and nobody has matched so far what we have in Arizona. And We have to fight for it, but at least it's there to fight for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's worth fighting for. And yeah, the other states just, I've looked at them too, and they don't even come close. They don't even compare. In Kansas, we got a set dollar amount for the year that we could spend on any services we wanted, but that was it. So like just, like the dollar amount would be like $3,000 for the whole year. Well, summer camp is $3,000. So if you want speech or habilitation or respite, there's no.
You got to pick and choose.
Yeah.
That's a terrible decision to make.
Yeah, it is.
When they need all of it.
And more, So I get we get the state benefits, the respite, speech, all provided by DDD, but then also out of my own pocket is, the ABA therapy, which has really been the most beneficial out of any of them.
I'm going to let you in on a secret because I found this out this year. I now get my ABA therapy covered through DDD. They have new CPT codes that allow them to not bill, because I was billing my primary insurance. So we'll have to talk about that later. But that was exciting because it was going towards our deductible that we had to adhere to or come out of pocket for. So.
Yeah, I did have actually Access, I think, covered some of the expenses for ABA at a different provider.
Yeah.
But not all providers will accept it, I think, is the thing. So, yeah. Another podcast, right?
Another podcast. I know. I'm looking at my notes. I'm like, we want to talk about DDD in school, but that might just be entirely new pods altogether. Right. But I do want to ask how he got so involved into bowling, because you just came back from Las Vegas for spring break and you guys bowled up a storm. Yeah. So he's quite an athlete. He loves sports. So it started, I got him a little at a garage sale, a little basketball, like those little ones you wheel out in your driveway for little kids. And, so he started playing basketball and just loved it. He would be out all day. So, and, he's always had very good gross motor skills. So he got started into sports that way. And then bowling, my family would get together once in a while for birthdays. And one of the first events Darius went to was bowling. And ever since then, he's been hooked. So he's a Special Olympics gold medal winner for bowling and for basketball. Oh, that's awesome.
And he's on a bowling league. He goes every Saturday for special needs kids.
It's specific for special needs kids?
Yeah, specific for and adults too. So it's all ages. So he gets to mingle with, individuals of all ages. So it's been great. And then, he gets to go at least one other time a week, usually on Sundays. So, so he wanted to go he loves watching bowling. If he's not bowling, he's watching the pros bowl. He knows all the pros by names. He knows and I've learned stuff about bowling. I thought it was just, throw the ball down, knock as many pins as you can over, but there's all kinds of oil patterns, and there's a lot to know about bowling, and he knows it all from watching the pros on TV. So he saw a lot of the professional tournaments and stuff, and a lot of them are in Las Vegas, so he wanted to go bowl. So I'm like, okay, for spring break, we'll go bowl. So we hit 4 bowling alleys in 3 days this past week for spring break, and I think he bowled 36 games during that time. He had a blast, and he just loves the sports, especially bowling.
And when you can do something like that, it's like he's typical.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something you could do with a typical teenage son.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he does. He has friends that we go bowling with. And so you wouldn't know any difference when he's bowling, No,
and being at the bowling alley for his birthday party a week or so ago, I mean, they were just such nice kids and nice families, and he was rocking that shirt.
Yeah.
He was styling.
He's been wanting like a pro league type bowling shirt, and his caregiver actually got him that for his birthday. So he wore it for 6 days straight, and finally I was like, Darius, you have to wash it. I mean, I made him wear a t-shirt under it because I knew he was going to be wearing it every day, but I was like, dude, you've got to wash that thing.
Also like a typical teenage boy.
Yeah, that's
Right?
true. Yeah, yeah. It's funny how many things, that these behaviors that these kids have that we think of as atypical, when really, if you think about it, most teenage boys or girls would have those same behaviors.
You have no idea the drama I've been putting up with since Elle joined puberty.
Oh yeah, I
That's
bet.
another pod too.
Yeah, I can't imagine. That's got to be fun.
So how's dating been? Like being a single dad with a autistic son?
Well, it's mostly been non-existent.
I'm asking all the personal questions. You
Yeah.
didn't have time.
Yeah, no. Yeah, well, no, I didn't have time, and then these days it's online dating because I work 6 days a week, and when I don't work, I have Darius, so there's not really time to meet anyone. And there, everyone's online dating now anyway. But you put I'm a single father with an autistic son at home full time in your profile.
Does your phone ring off the hook?
No, no, it remains dormant and nothing
Well, at
happens.
least you're honest.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's it's a shame that kind of thing scares people away. But I guess I don't know. They know what they want or don't want. So I kind of developed a strategy where I've tried to zero in on women that work with children. So like teachers or BCBAs, nurses, things like that. And so I've had a little bit more success with that recently.
That's a pretty good strategy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I am grateful that you agreed to do this session with me today. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, but you just kind of rolled with it.
Yeah, we got through it.
I just love your story, and I'm just so proud to know you and to call you my friend. And glad that we had a chance to forge a friendship over the last couple of years.
Yeah, me too. It's been great. It's great knowing you, and look forward to being friends for many years and helping each other out and helping out other families and other folks in our spot.
Absolutely. So thanks for being a warrior unicorn parent. Our friendship means a lot to me, and I'm glad that you wrote that badass letter to get that safe home to raise Darius in. And I'm glad that the seller was kind enough to put integrity over profit.
Yeah, well, I think that was a lot has to do with you. So I think you did
you.
some convincing there.
I am also persistent.
Yeah.
It has served me well in many areas of my life.
Yeah, well, I think if I had a different real estate agent, Darius and I might be living in one of those little shacks that we went to look at that were way overpriced. So we got lucky that we met you.
I think we'll wrap it up here, and I hope you'll come back.
Yeah,
and I
anytime.
just want to say whoop whoop to all out there. Thanks for listening. This is Jen and Ron.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.